When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, ready for battle, in front of the Israelites as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. That day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant law to come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." And the priests came up out of the river, carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran in flood as before. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and that you might always fear the Lord your God.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Let's pray together. Lord, we really do want to have those words that we've just sung fulfilled in our lives and fulfilled now as your word is proclaimed, that you will indeed teach us full obedience and holy reverence before you, our God. Amen. Well, please do be seated and turn to Joshua chapter 4 as we've reached this part of Joshua. And to begin with, I just want to ask you if you can recognize some structures. So just have a look at the screen. Does anybody know what this structure is? Just put your hand up. Anyone? Go on, Alex.
The Holocaust Memorial.
Yeah, it's in Berlin in Germany, and it's a memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, known as the Holocaust Memorial. Yeah, here's the second one. What about this one? I thought Richard might. Well done, Richard. Anybody else? Go on then, Richard.
It's the monument at Stalingrad.
Yeah, that's right. This piece is dedicated to the heroes of the Battle of Stalingrad. Do you know an interesting fact about its steps, Richard? No. There are 200 steps, one for every day that the Battle of Stalingrad lasted. Okay, what about this one? Anybody know what that one is? Tim?
Is that the Hiroshima?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right, yeah. So this is Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. And then that in the background is the Gembaku Dome. originally for art exhibitions and educational centre, but now most famous because it's the only building that survived at the centre of the blast. What about this one? I'd be very surprised if anybody gets this. You'll definitely get a bonus point. Anybody know what this one is? No? Okay. This is a memorial to the victims of witch trials in Vardø in Norway. 91 people were tried and executed for witchcraft in 1621. Now, here's a question. Why do we build things like that? Why do we build monuments? Why do we build memorials? Well, of course, we want to remember past events. Yes, we want to focus our minds on things that happened in the past. But I think deep down, one of the reasons that we build memorials is because of our propensity to be forgetful. We forget so easily the sacrifices people have made. We forget so easily the great acts and deeds that people accomplished on our behalf. And we forget the great wickedness that humanity are capable of. We so easily forget. And so it's not surprising that the Lord commanded Joshua to set up a memorial on that great day after the crossing of the Jordan. 12 stones taken from the Jordan River set up in Gilgal, lest the people forget all that the Lord had done for them. This event spoke for generations to come, to make sure that these stones would be a talking point so that people would not forget. They could speak to their children and their grandchildren. Whenever an Israelite family are out for a picnic in Gilgal National Park, children will see this strange stone structure and say to the parents, what do these stones mean? 12 stones don't just pile up on top of each other like that. And the parents will say, well, it's good that you ask that, because these stones speak of an historical event, verse 22. They'll say to their children, look, do you realize that our people, the Israelites, we've faced two watery obstacles in our life already. The first was to enable their exit from tyranny in Egypt at the Red Sea. And the second watery obstacle was in order to enter into the promised land. So the sea represents the territory to which they must never return, and the River Jordan represents the territory from which they must never leave. And so they ask their parents, and they'll say, look, these stones speak of an historical event. Just as it took a miracle to get our people out of Egypt, so it took another miracle to get our people into the promised land. Just as God parted the waters of the Red Sea for Moses, so he parted the waters of the River Jordan for Joshua. And both of these miracles happened so that generations to come would know that the Lord had worked mightily for them in the past. He'd come to them in their time of need. It was the Lord, Yahweh, who performed both miracles. And so you can imagine an engrossed Jewish girl, while eating the Passover meal, seeing the lamb and bread, would say, what does this all mean? And her parents would say, look, these things speak of an historical event. The rescue from Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea. And a bewildered Jewish boy, while hiking in Gilgal, seeing 12 stones, will say, what does this mean? And it will be pointed to an historical event, the entrance into the promised land with the parting of the River Jordan. And an intrigued boy and girl sitting in this theater, seeing the bread and wine, will say, what does all this mean? And we'll say to them, look, this speaks of an historical event, the crucifixion and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, to rescue us from sin and to bring us into eternal life. God's memorials always point back to historical events, whether that's a rainbow that points back to the judgment of a flood and the rescue in an ark, whether that is a Passover meal that points back to a rescue, the historical event of a rescue, whether that is stones that point back to entering the promised land, or whether that's bread and wine that point back to a sacrifice. Real signs connected to real historical events so that God's people can have real confidence that the Lord acts for his people. The Lord moves in mighty power to deliver. You see, we Christians, we don't remember, or we don't reminisce merely and purely for a desire to go back to the good old days. Now, the purpose of biblical remembering is to assure us that the God who acted in the past continues to act on behalf of his people. In other words, remembering is not just designed to transport you back to the past, but to equip you and to encourage you to live in the present with an eye on what God will do in the future. That is why we have this in our liturgy of the Lord's Supper. You remember what I say? As we come to the Lord's table, we are to remember the past event of Jesus' death. And we look to his future return, encouraging one another with the thought of it. And we learn by this to live in the present, feeding on Jesus by faith, especially learning how to live with fellow believers. We look back in order to remember what God will, to look forward to what God will do in the future, that enables us to live in the present. So the parents would answer, look, these stones speak of an historical event, but they also speak of the Lord's faithfulness, verse 23. The stones were a reminder to the people of all that they experienced on that day, what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. And then there to be a springboard for them to tell that story to the generations that follow, to their children, to their grandchildren, keeping a clear memory of all that the Lord did for them. And my dear friends, this is what God's people have always been charged to do. What we must do, we must rehearse in our lives all that the Lord has done, the Lord's faithfulness to us. Keep telling your stories so that you never lose sense of the wonder and awe of all the Lord has accomplished in your life as he's moved time and time again in faithfulness towards you and towards his people. It's very natural to tell stories, isn't it? Do you not think? You see a car, an old car, and you say, oh, that's like the first car that my family had. And I remember wonderful trips to Skeggy and fish and chips in the back seat of that car. Or you get a familiar aroma in your nostril and you say, that reminds me of Nan's kitchen, and when she was baking and how she let me lick out the mixing bowl that had raw eggs in it and nothing happened to me. I didn't die. Or when I was back at my dad's at Christmas, I walked down to the conker tree just by myself and stood there remembering the hours and hours of fun I had there with friends, throwing sticks up to try and knock down the conkers. And then I rehearsed it all to my children when I got back to the house. Sights, smells, structures, subjects, all trigger memories, just like the stones did at Gilgal. And there are memories of experience, aren't there? Of God answering prayer, God's marvelous hand of provision that we should rehearse to one another. We have our own stones, don't we? Do you not think? They're on Beverly Road because we had a building that we were bursting out of. And time again, we were praying and thinking, what are we going to do? We can't build forward. The council wouldn't allow. We couldn't build backward. There's a well-established coffee shop on the right and a bank on the left, a major world bank. There's no way we're going to be able to do anything. And then the Lord in faithfulness said, no, you will expand. HSBC is now moving them on. I'm going to provide the money to buy the building through one of my people. And then I'm going to encourage you in generosity to provide money to reorder the entire building. And we should remember that. Retell that story of God's faithfulness and tell it to future generations. See, we must tell over and over again what the Lord has done in his faithfulness. We all have items, don't they, that tells stories, what we might call mementos from the past. What are your objects that remind you of the Lord's faithfulness? Is it a particular Christian book, or is it your first Bible, something that first sparked your interest? And now it's a token, an item that remembers the Lord's faithfulness. Maybe it's some object from your home country that you had to leave and flee, and the Lord has faithfully brought you here, and you remember the Lord's faithfulness in getting you here and what the Lord has done for you. Maybe even it's a child. Prayers and prayers to the Lord. And then you have this child, and you see them grow up, and you remember the Lord's faithfulness. Maybe it's a job. Maybe it's a course that you finished. Who knows what it is? But we all have these little items, don't they, that recall to us the Lord's faithfulness. The Lord has done marvelous things and continues to do so much for us. And we must be willing to speak of it, passionately share it, rejoice in it, unashamedly lift high the name of God, who has done so many marvelous things for us. And of course for us, fundamentally, most importantly and most significantly, the items we have are bread and wine, reminding us of the Lord's faithfulness in sending the Redeemer that he promised about at the very beginning when he said to Adam and Eve, one born of the woman will crush the serpent's head. And in faithfulness he came, Messiah, Jesus Christ. That bread and wine cause us to look back to the Lord's faithfulness and push us forward in a hope-filled future. So that little child asked about the stones at Gilgal. They said, look, they speak of a historical event, the river drying up. They speak of the Lord's faithfulness, but they also speak of the Lord's power. Verse 24, this remarkable display of God's power when the people of Israel miraculously crossed the Jordan River has a very important purpose, so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the Lord is mighty. The stones were a testimony to a watching world. Look at verse 24. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful. 12 stones from the riverbed reminded his people and the nations of God's strength. When the Israelites arrived at the river Jordan, we keep hearing, don't we, that it was in full flood, perilous in its speed, dangerous in what it concealed below. The jungle-like growth that the flood covered by the rapid current meant that it was impassable, its crossing impossible. Have you ever thought, why wasn't there an army on the other side of the Jordan River to greet the Israelites? Why wasn't there an army there? Because everyone knew that the river was impossible to cross it at that point. Impossible to cross it at that time of year. 3 days the Israelites lingered on that side of the Jordan. 3 days for the Jericho watchmen to send back reports to the city that probably went a little bit like this. Look, guys, I wouldn't bother putting your armor on just yet. Carry on your games of pool and whatever you're doing, because they're not going to be here anytime soon. Because the point where they're camped near the River Jordan, it's absolutely unimaginable that they're going to be able to get over the river anytime soon. And then wham, bam, they're on the land. on their side of the Jordan, how could the impossible become possible? How can the unimaginable become a reality that struck fear into the inhabitants of the land? When the Lord moves in mighty power on behalf of his people. The unimaginable, 12 stones from the bed of a flooded river become an unmistakable marker to the power of God standing in Gilgal. And is your mind drawn to another impossible situation in history? Another unimaginable outcome marked by a stone? The dead body of the would-be Redeemer laid in a tomb. The dead cannot come back to life. It's impossible. A dead man can't walk again. It's unimaginable. Nobody can hold back the torrent of death. No one can pass through the waters of death. Then wham, bam, third day, and here's the man again. Jesus Christ walking amongst us. The stone is rolled away and Christ emerges from the grave. And so we believers remember that stone set aside in order that we can walk through death to the promised land. What mighty power of God. The stones speak of the power of God. But these stones also cause us to fear the Lord our God, verse 24. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. The Lord had fulfilled every covenant promise he'd made to his people. The eyes of the Israelites had seen it. The Canaanites' hearts feared it. And so there was no excuse left for the people to not trust in God's promises. No excuse they could make for worshiping the false gods of the Canaanites. Because it was at the time that the river overflowed that the Lord dried up the riverbed. Why? So that his people might overflow in obedience. Wasn't it wonderful that we sung that song before? Full obedience, holy reverence. That's what we're remembering should bring about in us. So how did this fear work out in practice for them? Well, firstly, in honoring the leader the Lord has appointed over them. Look at verse 14. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they stood in awe of Moses. As a result of this event, it became apparent that the Lord was with Joshua, just as he'd been with Moses. God would speak to Joshua, then Joshua would speak to the people. He's been repeatedly confirmed in his office. The people now say, Joshua is the man we must follow, and we must live in complete obedience to what the Lord speaks through him. Part of the outworking of their fear of the Lord was that they started to submit in obedience to Joshua's leadership. How did this fear work out in practice? Well, secondly, in the teaching of their children to love and fear the Lord. Look at verse 6. This is to serve as a sign amongst you. In the future, when your children ask you, what does these stones mean? Tell them. And then in verse 21, he said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them. The memorial stones were to serve as a basis for sharing their faith with their children. Two places in the chapter that they're told, look, when they ask about the stones, it's the responsibility of parents, responsibility of the older to tell the younger generations all that the Lord has accomplished for them, and to communicate this with conviction to those that follow. See, this reverent fear that this event was to bring about, was to cause them not to forget and to ensure that the generations that follow never forget either. So let me ask this question. I guess, first of all, I ought to ask it to parents directly. But let me just ask it to you as people who are obviously the generation above the ones who've left to go out to their rooms. What will your children remember most about you? Or what will the generation in church remember most about you? What will your children remember that mattered most to you? Will they grow old thinking of you parked in front of the TV, glued to the internet, playing on your phone, maybe even sitting in the corner with a cup of tea, reading a Christian book, rather than engaging them in spiritual conversation, rather than telling them that they need to fear the Lord, rather than rehearsing to them God's faithfulness shown to us in Christ Jesus and shown in your life in so many ways? What are you going to do to preserve in the hearts of the next generation the knowledge of God? What are you teaching them that will build into their values system a reverence for God and confidence in His word? How did this fear work out in practice? Thirdly, by instilling in us an attitude that there's no turning back. These stones, taken from the River Jordan, they couldn't ever be returned, could they? Once the ark came onto dry land, the waters returned to flood stage. Their exit was blocked. We often think about the Red Sea and the River Jordan as open doors. God opening the door to them fleeing Egypt. God opening the door to the promised land. True, but they were also closed doors. Closed doors that they should never go back to Egypt, slavery to sin. Closed doors that they should never leave the promised land, the land of blessing. The entire nation was now cut off from any possibility of escaping back to Moab. And so they mustn't live in fear of what lies ahead, but trust in God's faithfulness and trust in God's power in order to move forward. In reverent fear, trusting in God for the victory as we move forward, no turning back. Fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord must drive out all lesser fears. Fear of the Lord must subdue worldly fears. Fear of the Lord must make sure that we never return to our former ways. What do we sing in the song? Though none go with me, still I will follow. No turning back. No turning back. So let me think, these stones encapsulate an event, an historical event. They demonstrate God's faithfulness. They reveal God's power. They encourage the people to live in reverent fear. And isn't that precisely what we should gain from the resurrection stone? Isn't that what the resurrection stone does for us? It demonstrates God's faithfulness. He spoke that He would send the Messiah who would come to deal with sin and to deal with death fully and finally. And He did it. Jesus said time and again that He would be arrested, He would be tried, arrested, executed, and on the third day, rise to new life. And He did. The resurrection demonstrates God's faithfulness to all the promises that He has made, all that He would do through Messiah in order to bring His people to safety. But the resurrection stone also reveals God's power. God did the impossible, didn't He? God did the unimaginable, didn't He? When He brought back from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ. With all the advancement in modern medicine and science, we still cannot bring back from the dead somebody who's laid in the morgue for 3 days, stone cold. And the resurrection reveals God's power, and that God's power is beyond anything that this world can imagine or comprehend. And the resurrection reminds us that that power is available to those who believe. And the resurrection stone encourages us to live in reverent fear. Why does it encourage us to live in reverent fear? Because the grave is not the end. Everything we do in this life matters. What we do in the body counts. Jesus' resurrection and our resurrection guarantees that. Isn't it interesting that the Apostle Paul, when he spends 14 chapters telling the people how they should live and why it's so important what they do with their bodies and how they should live in holiness and not engage in sexual sin. And then in chapter 15, what does he teach on? The resurrection of Christ that guarantees our own resurrections. Why is it so important to his argument? Because if this body that you have now is what's going to be raised, that's a great incentive to not sin in the body. Christ's resurrection, our own resurrection, compel us to remember that what we do in the body counts. And when we think upon the stone of the open tomb, we're encouraged to remember that our deeds are all seen by the risen Lord, and they all should be right in his sight. So look to the bread and wine and remember Christ's rescue of us from sin and judgment. Look to the resurrection stone and remember the guarantee that you will enter the promised land. And in so doing, you will not forget the Lord's faithfulness, his power, and you'll live in reverent fear of him. Let's pray. Lord God, we praise and thank you for your grace to your church, to us, your people, that you understand us completely and you understand our propensity to forget your goodness, to forget your grace, to forget your mercy, and even to forget your judgment. And this leads us, Lord, to live in ways that are not honoring and pleasing in your sight and are not marked by reverent fear. So we praise and thank you that you have given to us that act of the Lord's Supper so that we can remember Christ's great work in rescuing us from sin. And you have given us that historical event, the resurrection of Christ, that reality, in order to encourage us in faithful living. Lord, cause us to be people who remember and never forget all that you have done. Amen.